Tonight on Primetime Politics, a meeting in Washington.
We're getting along very well, we're getting along very well.
A World Cup event brings the three amigos together in D.C., but can a FIFA celebration help move trade talks that have been stalled for weeks? We'll speak to the Ottawa Bureau Chiefs. Also, Alberta's pushback against Ottawa's gun laws. What message is Alberta sending to gun owners by saying it will ignore the federal law? We'll speak with the province's Attorney General. And Ukraine's former ambassador to Canada about the peace plan from the Trump White House that is now in limbo. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, soccer and continental free trade are rarely discussed in a single conversation, but that is exactly what happened today. The Prime Minister flying down to the U.S. Capitol to take part in a FIFA World Cup event, which Canada is co-hosting next year with the United States and Mexico. But beyond the soccer, today's event also represented the first face-to-face meeting between Carney and Trump in weeks. It also allowed for a meeting with Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum and got this positive assessment from Donald Trump in regards to the relationship shared by the three North American leaders.
We're getting along very well, we're getting along very well.
But how useful are these quick meetings when the focus is clearly more on sport than business? That question started off this week's episode of the Bureau Chiefs podcast. Take a listen now to my conversation with Robert Fife from the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles from the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance from Presse. And I do want to begin with your measure of how important this meeting in Washington is on the sidelines of this FIFA World Cup event. But, they are talking on the sidelines just days after Donald Trump said he is once again willing to essentially walk away from CUSMA. How important are the talks, Bob?
Well, look, I mean, anytime you have an opportunity to have a conversation with Donald Trump, with the Mexican-Canadian leaders, it's a good opportunity to try to make your points for the importance of North American free trade and integrated economies. I mean, the real issue here is what's going to happen in the spring when the negotiations for the renewal of the CUSMA begin. And, most people in the trade field do not believe that they're going to want to cancel this trade agreement. We heard in Congress this week almost unanimous views from the U.S. business community how important this continental free trade agreement is to the United States. I think what we may end up, so I don't think that we're going to see a cancellation, but I think we may see some instances where there'll be annexes for Canada and annexes for Mexico. But overall, I think we'll get some kind of agreement. It'll probably favor the Americans more so than the current agreement has. I don't think you're going to see a significant change because the U.S. business community is pretty loud and they're saying that we actually need Canada and Mexico, and because it's the world's largest trading zone.
Mm-hmm. And already their bottom line's being affected by this. But how important are these kind of talks? Trying to squeeze it in, but bearing in mind, for example, in Carney's case, this is the first face-to-face that he's actually had with Donald Trump in months.
And the first for Claudia Sheinbaum. They've met virtually, the Mexicans and Trump. So it's actually a really important, not just the dynamic on stage that we saw in public, that they all seem to be having a good time in high spirits and whatnot, but the fact that they were meeting at length on the sidelines after the event is important. And it is really important at a time when not just those messages are coming from the U.S. business community, but at a time when we have the U.S. trade representative also saying to Politico on Friday that, look, he still may go two separate deals. So that if Sheinbaum and Carney, who appear to be on the same page, are in the same room as Trump and can press him, let's all do this together. This can be worked out. That's an important dynamic. And I know staff were not inside the meeting, and that's a weird dynamic. But the fact that Carney has done some groundwork before this with the Mexican president to ensure they're saying the same message to the president, it's got a better chance perhaps of piercing.
Well, it was interesting to hear from Donald Trump going into that FIFA event. He was getting scrummed a little bit on the red carpet, and he said, "Oh, we get on well. We get on well." So
yeah.
you know, it's hard to read the tea leaves.
Breaking news, they get along well. Oh,
well, you know,
told us.
Exactly. If actions speak louder than words. JD, what do you say about the importance of this type of meeting?
Well, I was reminding myself like what Mr. Carney said a few weeks ago when he answered the questions from a reporter. I think it was at the APEC summit, and he was asked when was the last time he spoke with Mr. Trump, and he said, "Who cares?" I think that's becoming the attitude right now because of trying to solve sectoral tariffs with the United States. It's difficult because you don't get the president's attention for long enough to deal with those issues. And I'm told that I've had a chat with Dominique Leblanc, the minister responsible for Canada-U.S. relationship, and said they had nothing, no discussions at all since Mr. Trump suspended the talks. So it's pretty much empty right now. And there's not much hope that anything else will be accomplished because Mr. Trump's attention goes in one direction for 5 minutes and the other direction for the other 5 minutes. And, you know, it's like that every day. So it's hard to get him to try to solve a file that is important to Canada because his attention span is very limited.
I mean, that threat we heard this week that he might let it expire, he's expressed before. And what he didn't say is, I am going to end it or I am going to kill it. But he could do that. In the next 3 months or 6 months as we approach the deadline, July 1st, for to renew it, we will hear that. Many negotiators in the business community expect more threats of a kind to exact the kinds of concessions that Bob mentioned. You know, he is coming after agriculture, dairy in Canada. He needs better access to Canadian potash, uranium, energy, and aluminum is a big thing for their economy. So I expect more of that.
But I would say this also, when Mr. Trump decided to suspend negotiation, he also said they would slap Canada on a 10% increase for tariffs. Never happened.
Yeah.
So,
don't remind him.
But it never happened. So can you always take Mr. Trump at his words? No. But you see clearly that this is part of his negotiation tactics to raise the possibility of tearing this deal apart. The Congress will not allow that, nor the business community in the United States.
Yeah, and certainly we're seeing that type of domestic pressure on Donald Trump on a number of fronts right now in the United States. So, so watching.
And just one other thing. I mean, if you try to do a separate deal with the Mexicans and the Canadians, you need congressional approval for that. That's not easy. Yeah. You know, it's just not in the cards.
Okay, well, we will watch and see what happens out of this, as you say, closed-door meeting. What comes out of that, we'll see in the next few days, perhaps. But listen, let's move on right now to national projects, because, you know, those national projects under the Carney government continues with or without talks with the United States. And this week we heard a special chiefs gathering of the Assembly First Nations, and they called on Ottawa unanimously to abandon the MOU that Ottawa signed last week with Alberta. They are expressing concerns about Indigenous consultation. And to that, take a listen right now to the AFN National Chief, Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak.
Listening to the discussions this week, we're also reminded that even though our rights are being threatened today in new ways, First Nations across this country are stronger than we have ever been. First Nations have overcome great odds to protect our rights, our lands, our laws, our resources, and our waters. First Nations stand with Canada against provincial separatists that want to break this beautiful country apart. We support growth and prosperity for all, but not at the expense of our rights and the government's obligations to First Nations.
Okay, now, and when it comes to national projects, I appreciate the fact that this government has always signaled it wants to move quickly with these projects, but I do wonder whether or not they've just added to the timeline of getting things done by putting consultation with Indigenous nations after an MOU rather than putting it ahead. What do you say to that, Bob?
Well, look, they're negotiating with the government of Alberta. They're not negotiating with the government of BC or First Nations. That is the next stage of negotiations. I actually thought that the AFN meeting was very productive. When you heard the Prime Minister speaking and the Minister speaking, the Indigenous leaders or communities have a lot of, they want to be part of the resource development. They want to benefit from them. They want their people to have jobs. They want to enjoy the economic benefits from that so that they can enrich their communities. And that's the kind of message I got from them. They also want the federal government to have clean water in their communities. And he answered that pretty emphatically, which is that I think we have like 36 or 39 communities that still need clean water, and there's going to be a new water bill coming forward. To me, you can look for all the negative stuff in these kind of meetings, because there are 600 bands in this country, and none of them ever agree on anything. But I thought that the message coming out of this was chiefs that are willing to sit down and negotiate with the federal government. They have some things on their, certainly they don't want to see the ban lifted on the Pacific Northwest coastal oil tanker ban, but you didn't get a sense, I didn't get a sense, frankly, that they were unwilling to not negotiate. They just want the federal government to sit down with them, and then presumably the industry will have to sit down with them. Let's see where this goes. I mean, we're very early stages on this.
Yeah, Tonda?
I think that it was really interesting that the Prime Minister, for the first time that I can tell, set out his own understanding of what the Indigenous rights are under the United Nations Declaration. He framed it very clearly as the Crown having a duty to consult and accommodate, but he clearly, for the first time under his government, set out that it also is not a blanket consent, that they will negotiate to a point and consult to a point. And he has also set out a timeline for it, as in it happens now once there is actually a proposal, and it's the Alberta government and the companies to negotiate rights and benefits, equity stakes for Indigenous communities, something they welcome. But I think there was also a clear message that was put back to the Prime Minister, which is you can't outsource that, and you can't exclude us from the get-go. And whether or not that's a message that's compatible with Mr. Carney's plans under this major project, it's still one he needed to hear. And what I found interesting is that, yeah, a lot of ministers showed up, and there were some really interesting exchanges. I also thought that was interesting that the Energy Minister, Mr. Hodgson, who'd been so flippant about the travel timing concerns that those coastal First Nations had about meeting him last week, were so dismissed. He was supposed to appear, but they did that meeting behind closed doors, perhaps to avoid sort of what happened to Mr. Poilievre one time when he showed up there. And this did not happen to the Prime Minister. They didn't get up and turn their backs on him. So, you know, that speaks to a different dynamic, but I think a dynamic that is still very much in play and fluid.
And that was Robert Fife, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Tonda MacCharles, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Joël-Denis Bellavance, Ottawa Bureau Chief for La Presse. And what you heard is part of our new podcast from PrimeTime Politics and CPAC. It's called The Bureau Chiefs with Michael Serapio. New episodes drop each week that PrimeTime Politics is on air. The latest episode is available now. Well, as we shared with you on Tuesday, Alberta unveiled its response to Ottawa's gun buyback program this week. The federal law is designed to get assault-style weapons off the street and includes both an amnesty period and compensation. But the UCP government of Danielle Smith does not support the initiative, and it is now turning to the Alberta Sovereignty Act to circumvent the federal law.
We know that nearly all violent gun crime in Canada is not committed by legal firearm owners, but by those who obtain weapons illegally through our nation's porous borders. Turning previously legal firearms into prohibited ones does nothing to make our streets safer.
Well, we are now joined by Alberta's Attorney General, Mickey Amery. Thank you for the time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Listen, first and foremost, just to clarify, on what grounds are you opposing the federal government's gun buyback program?
Well, on a number of grounds, really. We've said time and again that the federal gun buyback program does not achieve what it is intending or telling Canadians that it's intending to achieve, and that is public safety. We know that the federal gun buyback program disproportionately impacts law-abiding citizens all across this country. And we don't think that that is the root cause of violence in this country, nor is it targeting the illegal guns that are flowing through into our country from other places.
Now, CPAC did reach out to the federal public safety minister, and his office sent us a statement that reads in part, quote, "The Supreme Court of Canada has been clear that the Parliament of Canada has the constitutional authority to legislate on firearms, including through the Firearms Act and related criminal code provisions, as confirmed in the 2000 reference Firearms Act Supreme Court decision. The authority," the statement goes on to say, "applies across all provinces and territories." I appreciate what you're saying about, the efficacy of this program and what it's hoping to achieve, but ultimately the Supreme Court has sided with the federal government on this. Are you rejecting that?
No, we certainly respect the decision of the Supreme Court, and we're certainly say time and again that the federal government is free to enact whatever programs they think are appropriate, but it certainly is within our purview to respond to that and say that we simply will not assist or support in programs that we think are misguided and don't achieve what they're intending to achieve. We know that this program creates criminals in waiting from people who have done everything right here in Alberta and all across Canada. They have taken the gun safety courses, they've been thoroughly vetted, and they have acquired and they're storing and using these firearms in very safe manners. And so we're saying we're delivering a message to the federal government that we will not cooperate, we will not support, we will not assist in a scheme that targets innocent law-abiding Albertans.
So you will not assist, you will not support. That does not necessarily apply to the RCMP, though, as that is a federal police force. Am I understanding you there?
Yeah, most certainly it may not apply to the federal policing services, but here's the reality. We know that the RCMP is understaffed in many provinces all across this country. We've heard from provinces like Manitoba who are saying that the vacancy rate for RCMP officers is 30%. In Saskatchewan, it's 25%, and here in Alberta, it sits at around 20% vacancy. And so we're imploring our federal counterparts to really look at the root causes of what is happening here. They are taking valuable policing resources from the serious criminals and putting it towards a gun buyback program that simply won't do anything to curb that crime that is running rampant across our country. What we've been saying is this: you're dedicating $742 million to this program, and not a single dollar is going to shoring up our borders, supporting our policing and law enforcement, or even giving any funds to prosecutions to help deal with these serious and violent criminals. That's where the money needs to go. That's where the problem lies. And we think that if the federal government were to focus on the real root causes of serious crime in this country, we'd all be so much better served.
Mm-hmm. Except that right now there is a voluntary compensation program, an amnesty period, where people who do own these types of guns can turn them in for compensation. And they're now hearing from your government that it does not necessarily apply to them in Alberta. Are you essentially telling Albertans who own these guns to break the law?
What we're saying is this: we're looking at the pilot program that started in Cape Breton, and initial reports are saying that despite the efforts and all of the work that is being put forward into that pilot program, only 22 guns have been turned in. Now, we think that that is a dismal number. We think that people, Canadians all across this country, are simply rejecting the federal buyback program. We know that Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario are fully aligned in our positions, and we think that many other provinces are doing the same thing. We also think that Canadians in general are rejecting this program, and what we're saying to people is this: we're not suggesting certainly that they break the law, but we are saying as a province, through our position, that we will stand by law-abiding firearm owners and we'll stand by law-abiding Albertans through and through.
But does that encourage them to break the law? I know you're not saying it to them directly, but by saying that you are going to fight this program, you're essentially giving sanction to them to ignore the federal law, are you not?
Certainly, we don't see it that way. We think that the folks that have acquired these firearms in a responsible manner, this is their property, they're entitled to it. I think that Alberta takes a very clear stand to say that, here in Alberta, we do not think it's in the public interest to target law-abiding, honest Albertans. These are folks that have done everything right, as I said earlier, but they're also the sport shooters. They're the hunters and the farmers that are using these guns in the safest possible way to create a scenario where we are going to pursue them and charge them and prosecute them, it's simply not something that we think is in the public interest. We think that our policing and prosecution resources could be better served dealing with the real criminals in our province and throughout our country. And that's what we've asked our provincial entities to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Now, your premier got booed last weekend at the UCP convention because of there are factions in the party who were unhappy with the MOU that Premier Smith signed with Ottawa last week. And it has been suggested that this announcement comes just days after that convention, and perhaps to try to change the channel rather on what was an unpleasant weekend for the premier. What do you say to that?
Well, look, let me just clarify. I think that certainly the premier enjoyed a tremendous amount of support from party members. They were frustrated, as many of us are, with the responses from the federal government, with the jurisdictional encroachment that we've seen time and again. I think that the MOU that was announced some time ago, a week and a half ago, is a positive step in the right direction. I think that we have been asking for many years for Ottawa to respect our jurisdiction as a province, but also to support the growth of Alberta, which in turn benefits all Canadians. The MOU is a real step in a positive way, and we're very encouraged by that.
But is this stance on guns meant to change the channel on those within the party that aren't happy with that MOU?
The stance that we've taken on firearms here in Alberta and the stance that we've taken in protecting and standing by our lawful, law-abiding firearms owners has been a consistent position that we've taken for years. We can go back to the very beginning of when the federal government started to announce its intention to create this buyback scheme, and we've opposed it through and through since the very beginning. This is just a continuation of that. The policies that we put forward are policies that have been in development for a very long time as well. There is nothing that the AGM was caused that may have changed the pathway that we have been pursuing. We stand by law-abiding Albertans, and there's nothing that has changed in that position.
Thank you, Amery. I really appreciate the time. Nice to meet you.
Thank you, a pleasure.
Well, according to the Kremlin, it is now awaiting a response from Washington when it comes to that peace plan U.S. officials are trying to bring about for Ukraine. 2 weeks ago, the Trump administration touted a peace deal negotiated with Russia, but Ukraine and European leaders pushed back. So that plan, well, it is now in limbo. But at the Halifax International Security Forum, I did speak with Andriy Shevchenko, a former Ukrainian ambassador to Canada. I spoke to him about his concerns regarding the U.S. deal as it began, and what he thinks is needed if a negotiated end to the war is the goal. Andriy, good to see you again. Thank you for the time.
Thanks for bringing me in.
Now, in this moment, we have been talking about this deal presented by the United States, negotiated with Russia, that would theoretically end the war with Ukraine. We don't know where it's going to go in the next few days, next few weeks. But what is your reaction to this agreement?
It's a no-go. It won't fly. We cherish all the efforts to help us, but this is not the way to move forward. Having said that, I think we should really use every chance to start a more profound conversation on what exactly peace plan out of the situation could be.
But of course, we all know, and from what we're hearing, Ukraine was not at the table. This was negotiated between Russia and the United States and then presented to Ukraine. How problematic is that?
Well, it is problematic because that's why this peace proposal does not reflect the reality on the ground. Like the idea that Ukraine should give up the territory that the Russians have not been able to conquer for the last 11 years, that sounds absurd on the ground. So we're talking about fortified land that the Russians have not been able to capture, and now we're expected just to give it away, to make our defense positions so much weaker. I think it's just, it's impossible. And one more thing, I think some foreign leaders, especially in Russia, they don't understand that it's not just about the president of the day in Ukraine, it's about the Ukrainian people. So it would be a huge mistake to think that through blackmail you could convince someone to sign something and then it would not work, because any Ukrainian leader would come back home and would have to deal with the Ukrainian society, with the political class, and with the servicemen and servicewomen. So it's very important that any way forward will be widely accepted in Ukraine.
Well, the Ukrainian President Zelensky, he has described the thinking around this deal as either Ukraine accepts something that's incredibly dishonorable for the country, or potentially loses a key ally.
Our dignity or strategic partner, that's a tough choice.
Are you ready to lose a strategic partner? Are you afraid that is what will actually happen?
Well, we had that choice earlier. There were days when we thought Russia was our strategic partner. But when it questioned our dignity, when it questioned our right to choose our destiny, to choose our future, then there was no question at all. Of course, we'll choose our dignity, our freedom, and our right to choose our future.
So do you think Ukraine can fight this war with allied support, but maybe not the United States?
Well, I don't think we're going in a direction where we'll have really to choose. I feel that it's a huge challenge. I feel us and the United States and Canada and all the other decent countries, we are working on this together. We'll have to find a solution together. So I do not want us to be dragged into thinking that we have to choose. That's probably what the Russians want us to do. Having said that, I think we should be very serious about what we do and what we say in public, because the very conversation about this peace plan has already done a lot of damage. We see that some sanctions against the Russians have been put on hold. We see that conversation on the Russian frozen assets has been put on hold. And that's bad, because those are the tools, those are the leverage that actually could help us bring this peace closer. So I encourage all of us not to panic, not to be emotional about this, but to be very pragmatic, keep focused on the important thing which can bring the war closer. And that means arm Ukraine, that means finally crush the Russian economy, that means enable us Ukrainians to do multi-domain strikes into the Russian territory in different domains. So I think there is a lot of intellectual consensus behind this. So let's not be dragged into some other conversation which doesn't help.
Well, Garry Kasparov spoke here at the conference, and clearly he believes that there are tools that the allies can use to, as you say,
precisely
hurt the Russian economy, bring this war to an end, but the allies have been hesitant to do so. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think he's right, and I think this is where Canada can lead the way in many senses, because Canada is known for actually being very open to do these things. That's where Canada can be a leader of this international coalition when it comes to sanctions, when it comes to really tough measures to put Russia on its knee, to crush the economy. Because in the end of the day, I believe we have come to two choices. Either we finally crush the Russian economy and end this war, or all of us have to prepare for a direct assault of Russia at NATO. I am afraid we do not have the luxury of in-between options anymore. There was time when we had, not anymore. So I think we finally be very serious about this. Either we find a solution to this problem now and help Ukraine with the war, or we'd better be prepared for something really huge, really big, which is coming.
And that really does underline the argument that Ukraine's been making about this Russian invasion since it began. This idea that Ukraine is really just the first domino, and that if Russia wins, other countries along the border with Russia would face similar aggression?
Yes, but I think something has changed. I think we used to have much more options. I think there was a lot of scenarios in between, some gray zones, and that distracted us from the big choice we're still to make. I think by now we clearly understand that it's just one or another.
Thank you for that, Andrei. I always appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
And that was Andrei Shevchenko. The full interview can be seen this weekend in a new episode of Profile, focusing in on the Halifax International Security Forum and the war in Ukraine. It premieres on Saturday evening and repeats on Sunday. You see the times right there on the screen. You can also watch it this weekend on our website, cpac.ca, and on our YouTube channel. Well, that is Primetime Politics for this Friday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back next week. Until then, Have a great weekend.